The United Nations Security Council will convene starting at 10 p.m. tonight at the request of Israel after a barrage of retaliatory airstrikes by Iran. The Iranian action comes after vowing to respond to a suspected Israeli airstrike against its consulate in Damascus in Syria in early April that killed senior leadership of its Revolutionary Guard, among others. Now, this has condemned echoes from leaders across the globe, including the United States and the UN Secretary General. And for the latest now, let's talk to our correspondent who's in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, as always, great to have you with us. So Israel now requesting this meeting late yesterday in the council, but competing narratives, we understand, emerging now from both the Israeli mission to the UN and that of Iran. So what exactly are they saying?
You frame it so perfectly, Alicia, that there are these two competing narratives emerging from the Israeli mission to the United Nations and the Iranian mission to the United Nations in letters written by the respective ambassadors to both the Secretary General and the President of the Security Council. Israel's ambassador, Gilad Erdan, says the attack, which included over 200 unmanned aerial vehicles, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, are a clear violation of the UN Charter and international law. Gilad Erdan says Iran has also publicly taken pride in the attack. The attack, he says, is a severe and dangerous escalation. And he confirms Israel's request to convene a meeting of the Security Council around 10 p.m. South African time tonight to unequivocally condemn Iran for these grave violations and to immediately act to designate the Iran Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization, right? So that's Israel. The Iranian ambassador has also written to both the Secretary General and the President of the Council. His name is Saeed Iravani, and he says the action was an exercise of Iran's inherent right to self-defense as outlined by Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, and in response to Israel's recurring military aggressions, particularly referring to the April 1st attack on an Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria, that killed senior leadership of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Article 51, Alicia, of the UN Charter says, nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of an individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member state. Iran is certainly arguing that the suspected, Israeli airstrike against that consulate that killed senior leadership of Iranian's Revolutionary Guard was a violation of international law and therefore gave it an inherent right in terms of the UN Charter, Article 51, to respond to that attack. I can now also confirm, Alicia, that the Secretary General of the United Nations, António Guterres, will brief on behalf of the United Nations when that Security Council meeting starts at around 10 p.m. South African time. I can preface a little bit about what he might say. The Secretary General, in a statement earlier, strongly condemned the serious escalation represented by the large-scale attack launched by Iran by the Islamic Republic of Iran. I call for an immediate cessation of these hostilities. He says he's very alarmed at the very real danger of a devastating region-wide escalation. He urges the parties to exercise maximum restraint to avoid action that could lead to a military confrontations on multiple fronts in the Middle East. So he's calling for a cessation of the hostilities, and one imagines, Alicia, that the Secretary General, when he briefs the Council later today, will echo those sentiments.
I mean, talk to us about that in broader aspect, as in terms of what we can expect from that G7 leaders sitting, Sherwin. And also, I mean, knowing for a fact, I mean, the US has been very adamant about the fact that it's a staunch supporter of Israel. But we are scared now as to, there's a lot of speculation as to what this support of Israel might actually lead to in the grander scheme of things, with possible widespread tension on members as well as allies of Palestine and Israel alike.
Well, what we are hearing out of the White House, certainly widespread reporting here in the United States, that a conversation between President Biden of the United States and his Israeli counterpart, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, essentially Biden urging the Israelis not to escalate this confrontation any further. He is reported to have said that the U.S. would not join a counteroffensive against Iran, and that the Prime Minister should essentially take a win here. Essentially what the Biden administration is arguing is that despite this large-scale barrage of missiles into Israel's defense capabilities, supported by the U.S. deployment of certain defense assets in the region, were able essentially to counter this attack, to block any severe damage in Israel. And so they believe that this is a success for Israel to demonstrate its defense capabilities in a region that is essentially hostile to it, and really sent a strong message of Israel's military capabilities, even in the face of over 300 missiles directed at it. And so he believes Israel can basically sit on this and say, we have been able to demonstrate our abilities here and take the win. They do not want to see an escalation. The White House statement also says that President Biden condemned the Iranian attacks in the strongest possible terms. And in reference to that G7 meeting that you mentioned, he's going to convene a leadership level meeting of the G7. And critically here, Alicia, listen to the language, to coordinate a united diplomatic response to Iran's brazen attack. So very clear language from the White House. They don't want to see an escalation, and they talk about a diplomatic response rather than a military response. Certainly that the President of the United States will be convening in terms of conversations he seeks to have with leaders of the Group of Seven Nations.
Certainly one to watch later on, Sherwin. I mean, I know that the former President Donald Trump has also weighed in on the matter. And of course, he has taken a swipe against Biden on his stance on the matter with Iran, rather.
Well, don't forget that we are in an election year in the United States, and Donald Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee. So anything that goes bad in the world where the United States might have a hand in will now, in terms of the political narrative emerging out of the Republican Party, and the leading Republican candidate for president is going to seek to impugn America's foreign policy in that regard. So that's more for a domestic audience than it is perhaps for an international audience. We'll let the politics play out in the United States, Alicia. What we will look to now is what will emerge from the Security Council later today, and what will emerge from meetings of Israel's war cabinet. That's where the focus needs to be now. The United States making it clear they do not want to see an escalation in this. How will the Israelis respond here? And remember, this also comes in the broader context of what has been happening in the Middle East, the war in Gaza, and how Israel has been prosecuting its retaliation to that Hamas attack on October 7th. You'll remember there are fissures in the relationship that have emerged between Washington and Israel in that regard. So one looks to see how the Israeli war cabinet is going to respond to this escalation from Iran. Certainly a word from the Secretary General is that he does not want to see a further escalation here.
And one wonders then, Sherwin, unfortunately we're out of time. I mean, what then, the impediment of all these developments will be on those current ceasefire talks. But I suppose we'll keep a very peeled eye in terms of those G7 leaders meeting this afternoon. Thank you so much to SABC News correspondent in New York, Sherwin Bryce-Pease.